Buenas tardes. Les damos la bienvenida una vez más a quienes hoy nos acompañan en el segundo ciclo internacional, una cita con la Biblioteca Nacional de México, Historia de la lectura y del libro en la pospandemia, reflexiones sobre un porvenir incierto. Para los que siguen esta transmisión en vivo a través de la plataforma de Zoom o de la página del Facebook del Instituto de Investigaciones Bibliográficas de la UNAM, les damos las gracias por acompañarnos en este ciclo. Antes de comenzar el diálogo, los hacemos partícipes de algunos avisos. Les recordamos que el registro de asistencia será a través del enlace que se compartirá en el chat de esta transmisión y el formulario estará vigente únicamente durante la charla. En cuanto a la participación del público, podrán hacernos llegar sus preguntas a través del chat. Les pedimos, por favor, realizar preguntas concretas y apegadas a los temas expuestos en la charla para propiciar el diálogo con el especialista. La intervención de los ponentes del día de hoy será presentada en una versión grabada para poder brindarle al público la versión subtitulada del mismo. Sin embargo, se encuentran con nosotros aquí presentes. Los ponentes nos acompañan y participarán al final de la charla en un diálogo con el público. Con ustedes al final va a ser muy interesante, me parece, la presentación. Tengo aquí entonces a Ben Davies. No sé si quieras presentarte, Ben.
Hello, thank you everyone for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. It's sort of early evening in the UK, and I'll apologize in advance, I did a moment ago, for my non-existent Spanish. But we'll do our best to answer questions and discuss the project with you. So thank you for having us.
Muchas gracias, Ben, agradece estar aquí. Dice que ya es un poquito de noche, empieza a ser noche en el Reino Unido. Se disculpa por el español, pero bueno, estará aquí con nosotros. Y también tengo a Tina Lupton, a la profesora Tina Lupton.
Just to second Ben and say thank you so much for having us. It's been a long 2 years in our profession, but there are some nice parts of the Zoom world, and obviously this is one of them. So thank you to all of you for facilitating this. It's exciting to be in this conversation.
Muchas gracias. Dice que bueno, que está aquí también presente, agradece estar aquí y que bueno, han sido 2 años en este trabajo que nos van a mostrar, y hay algunas partes de esta pandemia, 2 años, que una de ellas es justamente el Zoom. Y bueno, voy a presentar a los ponentes. Para empezar, la doctora Cristina Lupton. Cristina Lupton es de la universidad, es profesora en la Universidad de Copenhague y dirige la Escuela de Estudios en Lenguas Romances, Germánicas y de Inglés. Tiene un par de libros muy interesantes. El primero de ellos, bueno, cronológicamente los voy a decir. Reading and the Making of Time in the 18th-Century es uno de ellos, and Knowing Books son 2 libros de la profesora Lupton que les recomiendo buscar, son muy interesantes. Y Ben Davies tiene Sex, Genre and Time in Fiction and Culture, and Sex, Time and Space in Contemporary Fiction. La ponencia ha sido previamente grabada para poder subtitularla, y entonces pues sin más preámbulo voy a proyectar la presentación. En un momento se pondrá, aquí está. La pantalla que están viendo, perdón, porque no alcanzo. Me avisan cuando se va, por favor, porque no se está compartiendo.
Ya lo habías podido compartir hace
¿Ya?
unos
A ver,
minutos.
entonces. Ahí está, ¿no?
Sí.
Sí, lo vemos.
Perfecto, adelante. Entonces lo voy a poner. Gracias.
Thank you for having us here today and also for letting us give this talk in English. Tina in Denmark is going to take over and give some of this presentation as we've been working on this project together. So this project began in that long ago moment of spring 2020, when the very first weeks of the pandemic were associated with the promise of time to read. From the very start of the lockdown periods across the world, commentators speculated on this being an ideal moment for settling down with novels. On the 23rd of March 2020, for instance, Refinery 29 offered a list of impressively long novels, including Anna Karenina, Ferrante's Neapolitan novels, and Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series, and asked a question that seemed to be on many people's minds. When will you have a chance to work through these behemoths other than now? On the 20th of April 2020, the Times in Britain ran a piece titled, "The Best Long Books to Read During Lockdown." What? Only 800 pages? Its tagline was, "So you finally got enough time to get through a weighty classic." Academics and writers too bought into this lockdown logic, with the scholarly V21 collective starting an online close reading of Henry James' The Wings of the Dove and The Ambassadors. Declaring that War and Peace is a perfect book to read together for the duration of our necessary isolation, the writer Yuan Li started #TolstoyTogether, a collective Instagram and Twitter read of the novel. In June 2020, David Denby published his account of rereading Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment in an online class at Columbia in The New Yorker. And in November, Oliver Munday wrote about his reading of Proust during the pandemic. These early promises and idealized scenarios of pandemic reading prompted this study, which began in response to these assumptions that fiction reading would burgeon under these new conditions of social isolation, furlough, and quarantine. How, we wanted to know, would the reality of lockdown reading measure up to these predictions of novels and books as ideally suited to being read under these new conditions? Surely, we wondered, while eyeing our own workloads, not everyone would have the time to read like this. Wasn't the news or the HBO series more likely to capture the housebound reader's attention than the novel? But there was, of course, the tantalizing possibility that something was happening to reading, that the dying down of other kinds of activity and the dialing up of existential questions about human existence was bringing bookish activity to the fore. Certainly, as the first reports came in of spring 2020 numbers, it did seem that people were at least buying books. But how exactly were we, let alone historians of the future, to interpret that spike in loans and sales?
By the time we'd secured funding for a postdoc and an assistant and transcription and travel, it was late summer of 2020. Both Ben and I came to this moment equipped to think about reading in relation to temporality. Ben had written on time in contemporary literature, and I'd written on 18th century book use. And both of us had done quite a lot of thinking about codex as an interface with time. But we were novices at qualitative research. Our first task was to figure out how to reach readers, especially under lockdown, and what to ask them. In the end, we decided, largely out of necessity, to use existing platforms, Facebook groups, library listservs, Twitter. Ben advertised the survey on UK radio, and we reached out in Denmark to library book clubs to distribute our initial survey, which went out in September 2020 in Denmark and the UK. Later in the fall, and a little embarrassingly, we signed on as consultants for the Duchess of Cornwall's Instagram reading project, and were able to use that platform to reach even more interviewees. But canvassing these people meant limiting ourselves to studying people who identified as readers. More concretely, as the results of our initial surveys came in, it meant confronting what people in the book industry already knew, which is that people who buy novels and the people who read them are mostly white women. In the end, we got answers to about 800 surveys, and we interviewed about 80 of these people. Overall, about 75% of our respondents were female and 95% of them were white. We can talk more in Q&A about the sociological makeup of the group, but for now, let us give our initial thoughts on what this method of selecting participants has meant. In establishing that this was going to be a study of self-identified readers and their reading habits in 2020, we allowed ourselves to focus methodologically on time as the thing we were interested in. Rather than studying a certain group or the reception of a certain kind of book or genre, we were ring-fencing a certain historical period from about mid-2020 to early 21 as the primary object of our investigation. Lockdown reading was from the outset a different kind of study in this sense from, say, reading the romance, Janet Radway's seminal study of middle-class women in one town reading one kind of genre, or Elizabeth Long's book clubs, women and the use of reading in everyday life, which is defined by its engagement with one socioeconomic group, or Reading is My Window, Meg Sweeney's discussion of incarcerated women's reading strategies. It was also not going to be like Beth Bloom's study of self-help literature or Elaine Aoyang's When Fiction Feels Real, both recent accounts of certain kinds of texts and the readers they attract. Or like Martha Nussbaum's more abstract case for the moral education that comes with reading really good novels. Although our study is based on about the same number of interviews as Radway and Sweeney's studies, just under 100, we set no spatial or sociological limits on the people we talked to. We spoke to people in 2 countries from very different regions and class backgrounds with very different tastes in reading material. The one thing they had in common is that they were reading during a distinctive moment of history, one where contact with strangers and colleagues had been almost eliminated and the presence of one's own household amplified. Despite the other differences, our readers were all participating in a global crisis that had radical forms of behavioural change that had produced radical forms of behavioural change and disrupted any sense of everyday life or obvious futurity. Routines, plans, and normal ways of occupying space were largely gone. Practically, because our collieries applied only to this moment in time, we'd shifted the object and its user to bring into focus the point at which these 2 variables interacted. Saying more about this theoretically moves us in 2 directions that have been important for our work, but which we only have time to introduce briefly here. One is the direction of engagement with actor network theory, an approach known for highlighting the role objects play in what seem like human actions or interactions. For Bruno Latour, the walls of the classroom define just as much as a teacher or a curriculum what happens in the class, and the bump in the road directs the flow of traffic as well as any human agent. Starting with objects, his account of networks suggests, will tell us as much about society as any study of human intentions. This theory has galvanized the impulse to look at reading as an engagement with bookish objects in their most concrete guise, the paperback format, let's say, or a particular font, or the simple fact of a book being put into action at all, become in this framework key to understanding the shape reading takes as an activity and an occupation. But Latour himself has been subject to criticism for how little consideration this approach gives to the way events and objects only happen in time. In a conversation published 25 years ago in France, we find Latour upbraided by his fellow philosopher Michel Serres for imagining networks as if they were outside of time. Networks, Serres argues, leave an image that is almost too stable, but you immerse it in time, this network itself is going to fluctuate, become very unstable, and bifurcate endlessly. In opposition to actor network theory, which Serres compares to a way of describing a football game as if it were only the ball that moves, Serres calls for a historical method that would account for the fact that players also move on the pitch unevenly. Their choreography, he suggests, depends on time. It cannot be easily graphed or charted unless time becomes a dimension of the model of the game. For historians of the book, as many of us here today are, Sayre's invitation to think of the object and its network immersed in time is a particular challenge. A book, his argument suggests, does not circulate between stationary readers. Anything we can say about its materiality must be passed through the fact that it is read more often or handled distinctly on Sundays, say, or during a reader's retirement, or during a pandemic. The fact that a paperback has certain affordances materially must be passed by thinking about the way those signify differently, for instance, in summer. In attending to time, we would have to note how a book means something, not just because of the way it is made or printed, but because it spends one stage of its life as a commodity or a gift, or as something taken down from a shelf, because other avenues of reading have dried up. These temporal coordinates are easily overlooked by those working with actor network theory, as well as in studies that depend on sales and borrowing records, or more recently, on data about downloads and hits to digital sites. This project taught us almost immediately that sales figures and records were only going to be so helpful in answering the questions we wanted answered. At the start of the pandemic, our very first interview showed many people were reading what came to hand or what already existed on the bookshelf. One woman whose son ran a secondhand bookstore was supplied with books from his closed shop while sales were suspended. Others described turning, as those newspaper headlines advised them to do, to their own stockpiled collections of unread books, or rereading texts they already owned, or downloading free audio versions of Jane Austen novels from the internet. These acts of reading are amongst the many that notoriously leave no trace, but which undoubtedly increased in frequency in spring 2020 as people sealed themselves off most conscientiously into private spaces. These facts contributed to our sense that actor network theory was not really the model for what we were doing. If we wanted to think seriously about how reading was changing during the pandemic, we needed a model that would reckon not only with the way that the game's players had temporarily stopped moving and were now playing, we needed a model that would reckon with the way the game's players had temporarily stopped moving and were now playing a different kind of game because of this.
The other theoretical debate in which we found ourselves tangled up had to do with the debates over critical and non-critical reading within the discipline of literary studies. When we began this study, the decade of debate about surface reading, just reading, and non-critical reading within the US Academy was at its height in Europe. Scholars including Sharon Marcus, Stephen Best, Rita Felsky, and Elaine Oyoung, and to some extent Leah Price, had advanced the case for taking seriously the kinds of attachment lay readers felt towards books and characters. Others, including Jonathan Kramnik and Caroline Lejac, were advocating for the particularity of critical reading being at the very heart of literature as a discipline. Our work felt as if it belonged on this spectrum of debate. But unlike Felsky, who defends lay reading as a form of meaningful engagement with the world without talking to actual readers, we had hundreds of hours of interviews in which real readers told us things about what they did with books. Many of these reports complicated the idea that books were handled less critically or more straightforwardly outside the academy. On the contrary, many of the readers who volunteered to speak to us made complex cases for what they wanted from novels under lockdown conditions, even to the point of defending some forms of allegory and non-relatability that trained literature students are normally seen to want. Again, we realized that timing itself was at issue here. For regular readers of dystopian fiction or romance, for instance, novels that might have featured more simply as objects of attachment or entertainment or education before March 2020 had become important vehicles for engaging with questions of history, mortality, and time itself. The argument for taking uncritical reading seriously seemed in this context to assume too easily a certain set of needs and desires being stable amongst readers. It helped little with what we were seeing, which was historical change making all the difference. Readers who had once enjoyed the fictionality of fantasy were now invested in its plausibility, and readers used to reading classics at a distance were now caught up in what seemed their extreme proximity. The pandemic seemed to have problematized the distinction between critical and uncritical reading, often making categories like identification, distraction, and attachment, those categories uncritical reading defends, less relevant as explanations for why any particular kind of people read. This wasn't because books or people reading them had changed. It was because the conditions under which novels were being consumed were simultaneously so old and so new. We're going to move into a slower discussion of some of these examples now. To get there, though, let's first move back to the question we opened with, of whether people had more time under lockdown. For we did get an answer to that question quite quickly. Readers didn't uniformly find themselves with more time. This was especially true of parents and of those who were now working online at home. Some readers we spoke to described longer spells of unbroken time, or the possibility of reading that came with the extraordinary stationary summer of 2020. But many readers we spoke to felt that they had less time for themselves, and certainly less undivided or uninterrupted time. The interesting thing is that this did not mean they were reading less. On the contrary, it seems that the pundits of literary journalism were at least partly right, even if they were only right for the wrong reasons. Most readers were reading more, and they were reading more despite the feeling that they had less time. So why were they reading? The chapters of the book we've ended up writing answer this in multiple ways. Readers read to learn about plagues in the past, or to read about their own situation at home. They read classics. They read some of those really long books that journalists predicted they'd find time for. They read about the outdoors. To some extent, they kept up with publishing events like the release of Ali Smith's Summer in the summer of 2020. They also read to re-familiarize themselves with bookish objects on their shelves. Some read to escape or put lockdown into some sort of perspective, often doing so by turning to worse atrocities, such as that depicted in Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate. Many interviewees also discussed deliberately seeking out works by Black authors in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the international BLM protests of 2020. We're going to give two examples of the work that we've been doing with the interviews here. First of all, Tina is going to talk about the case of people reading about pandemics, in particular Camus. And then I'm going to come back and talk about the case of people reading really, really long books, the kind that the journalists at the beginning we started with suggested they might now have time for.
The first case of people reading novels about pandemics of the past seems relatively easy to interpret, both in terms of sales figures and motivation. On March the 3rd, 2020, Editorial reported on Twitter that sales numbers of the folio version of the French original of Camus' La Peste had spiked in the first 8 weeks of the year. In the UK, by November, sales of that novel had soared by 1,000%. While sales of the Danish translation were up 1,200% in comparison with the year before. This shows up in what several of our readers say about turning to that novel. Rebecca, for instance, describes her pleasure in Camus in these terms. It's just so similar to what's going on, but maybe a bit more extreme, she reports. Because obviously that was written before technology. So, you know, reading about people trying to get letters out to their loved ones and trying to get home to their loved ones and things. It did actually make me feel fortunate that we do have technology, that we don't have those issues of trying to connect with our families during that time. So I think it did put things in perspective. This account of the novel seems justified in many ways. Camus' description of the gradual increments in which a mysterious illness takes hold of the town of Oran in Algeria, his account of the losses and separations the closing of the city gates produces, and his insight into the specific horror of the death of a family member under conditions of quarantine do now seem uncannily prescient. Yet there's already something interesting about Rebecca's praise for the novel as a realistic description of events that have come to pass, which is that the plague was never written as a report on events that happened. Camus draws in his description of the illness that strikes Iran on other fictions of plague, such as Defoe's Journal of a Plague Year, and his novel was written to represent another kind of threat to human society. The town of Iran, stripped of its historical and geographical coordinates. We are told this story happened sometime in the 1940s, but we learn nothing of Algeria's colonial occupation, its real coastal position, or the experience of the Arab population, stands for the many 20th century towns under military siege in World War II. The stadiums represented in the novel on the outskirts of town, and the trains in which corpses are transported, reference without directly naming the specific horrors of Nazi Germany. The spread of a virus allows Camus, like many of the authors of dystopian and fantasy fiction today, to explore the idea of contagion and the conditions that call out simultaneously for new levels of human care and for protective isolation. As we look at the reception of the plague in 2020, this widely acknowledged status of the novel as an allegory presents interesting challenges. Is Rebecca wrong to imagine the plague as truly informative about the past and thus the present? None of the many fictions that have helped readers make sense of this pandemic, Lingmar's Severance, Emily St. John Mantell's Station 11, Saramago's Blindness, Liam Brown's Skin, Emma Donohue's Pull of the Stars, just to give some examples, are as explicitly denuded of real coordinates or as urgent in their political critique of the 20th century as the plague. But all of them use sickness and the challenges its survivors face to address larger problems of a society at risk of self-destruction and to conjure up a vaguely defined past or a future just out of reach. To read any of them as literally as Rebecca seems at best to miss fiction's prognostic powers, and at worst, to misconstrue entirely the messages of human responsibility that they carry. On the other hand, what we were seeing was no case of readers mistaking allegory for history. As Emil, a Danish fantasy reader in his 40s, puts it, a world where we walk around in masks, following the directions from an institute we don't quite trust, seems suddenly to come from fiction. The fact that we suddenly have a pandemic, an infection, he says, is a classic science fiction trope. If you want to write realistic literature right now, you have to deal with this. If you'd written it a year ago, it would have been science fiction. Kirsty, a UK librarian who spent much of 2020 furloughed, says, you see, she explains, I've never directly compared what I'm reading to my current situation. This is actually the first time I think I've really thought about that. While she always considers her reading quite deeply, Kirsty goes on to explain that normally I'll be in the story and I'll think about the story and I'll think about that world, and you know, it could stay with me for ages, but I won't really put it over my own life or like current world views. In the UK, Emily describes starting blindness at the beginning of the pandemic. The experience, she admits, gripped her in a way she wasn't quite prepared for. I was discussing it with my partner quite a lot, which I don't necessarily always do. I would perhaps discuss something at the end, but I was discussing it as I was reading it with him because I would think, I just can't believe this. Like Kirsty, Emily is surprised by this compulsion to connect the novel she's reading to her real world experience. This is not normally how she reads, but she'd stumbled into a new possibility of making such a connection between fiction and reality. And she finds herself relating her reading to her experience despite her own past preference for reading that rules out that vector of comparison. Fran, an English reader, notes in a similar spirit that her 2020 reading, which includes several novels with a pandemic-y kind of storyline, now strike her in a new way. Normally, I just don't notice that they're about these things, and it's almost like the Baader-Meinhof syndrome, where you suddenly become aware of this. Her circumstances have aligned with her reading, even without her will. It's the prominence of history itself that has reclassified the fantasy fiction she's always read as being suddenly about the real world. As we've discussed, in the background of this study are arguments for the merits of attending to actual reading practices rather than academic ones. These disciplinary debates can make it seem as if there are choices to be made between the study of reading as an everyday practice and its cultivation as a critical and disciplinary endeavour. Yet here, the taking of the responses of real readers more seriously allows us to see where fiction's capacity to solicit investment and attachment depends upon setting and circumstance. Like many other objects of significance, books emerge in this light as mattering differently within a certain constellation than in others. For the reader caught up in a global pandemic, a novel like The Plague reads differently than it does for the school student of French literature, reading it in healthy times. Thus, the alternative ways of thinking about novels that are parceled out to one kind of reading or another in the method wars becomes easily distinguished. Readers who once looked to novel becomes too easily distinguished. Readers who once looked to novels only for pleasure or distraction have found themselves in 2020 relating differently to genre fiction, consuming it with a new hunger for historical perspective and sense of its applicability to their lives. And readers accomplished in deciphering allegorical meaning have found themselves compelled to read more literally or less professionally and critically than they do under normal circumstances. Here and throughout the project, specifying and understanding the way these experiences arise from a conjunction of novels with their particular temporally defined conditions of reception has been our key activity.
Turning to our second example then, as we said, lockdown was often associated with a certain type of book and a certain type of reading activity, the big weighty book and the long time-consuming read. Unsurprisingly, however, calls to read Moby Dick, War and Peace, Proust didn't much consider the temporal conditions of reading such books, only the idea that everyone now had more time and could therefore read a classic doorstopper. However, as we have been able to investigate with our interviewees in detail, the very length of a book is part of the lived experience of reading it, not merely some abstract idea. Indeed, the long novel's length can often be a hindrance to readerly attention, especially in difficult circumstances such as a pandemic. As many interviewees discussed, the long read often presented existential as well as practical problems for reading during lockdown. Rebecca, in England, for instance, addresses the tension between readerly desire and the long read's temporal commitments and demands when she recalls how she didn't want to begin Joyce's Ulysses in case she could not finish it because, she says, I think if I hadn't completed it, it would have just made me feel like a failure, and I couldn't have handled that during the lockdown. So Rebecca initially subscribes to the logic of the opportune moment. It's the time to read, and positions reading the long, difficult classic as a challenge to overcome. However, attention to the act of reading in this instance inhibits the possibility of narrative attention. The prospect of attempting to read a long, complex novel becomes too much for her during the pandemic, as the usual distinction for her between life and work becomes blurred. So unlike those claims about lockdown being some sort of unfettered temporal gift to readers, lockdown often exaggerated the conditions under which people live and read. Living under lockdown, Rebecca is psychologically more comfortable with not beginning this novel than with starting it and abandoning it, which also shows how the long novel does not automatically offer some immersive form of escape or enjoyable experience. In Rebecca's case, attention does not simply flow from reader to the fictional world undivided, uninterrupted, as in, say, Martha Nussbaum's account of narrative attention. It does not even begin to flow. The attention Rebecca gives to the weight and length of the book and her life situation prohibits this particular long read. Such reading resistances also surface for Alexandra in Bournemouth in England, who was troubled by the idea of beginning Hilary Mantel's The Mirror and the Light, published in early 2020, explaining, I love Hilary Mantel so much, and I love this trilogy, but I looked at it and I thought, what if I die before I get to the end of this book? It will be the most unsatisfactory experience. Far from offering then the experience of idealized narrative attention that is beyond paraphrase, as Nussbaum would put it, the very length of the third part of Mantel's Wolf Hall trilogy is problematic, and problematic because of the conditions under which this reader approaches it or doesn't. During the first UK lockdown, Alexandra has an intense fear of death for herself and also a justified expectation of Cromwell's literary demise, both of which affect her ability to focus and pay readerly attention. Here we see just how, as Felsky writes in The Limits of Critique, the text as a co-actor in a network is something that makes a difference, that makes things happen, or indeed in this case, not happen. For critics such as Frank Kermode and Peter Brooks, the notion of the end in life and literature is especially important, loaded with significance. In Kermode's The Sense of an Ending, we see a wonderfully sustained and attentive account of a relationship between fictive ends in literature and in life. But Kermode does not consider the reader's experience as such, nor offer a phenomenological account of any reader being at the beginning, middle, or end, of reaching the end or being thwarted from doing so. Such an absence seems particularly significant, for example, when Kermode argues that Sartre's La Nausée represents, and I quote, a kind of crisis in the relationship between fiction and reality, the tension or dissonance between paradigmatic form and contingent reality. His reflections ultimately remain on a literary theoretical plane, whereas Alexandra's contingent reality shows that she can't even begin to read the 1,000-page novel because of her fear of ending in the middle. In his account of the anticipation of retrospection and reading for the plot, Brooks likewise posits the end of narratives of significance. The end of the narrative, in Brooks's formulation, is a type of metaphoric death, a point at which the reader is able to reach the maximal point of retrospection they have been anticipating. Narrative may want this ultimate moment of understanding, but as Alexandra shows, narrative may want this ultimate moment of understanding, but Alexandra shows how real ends and fictive ends can compete with and not always easily map onto one another. The idea of Judgment Day and death in reality negatively influences her, impeding her ability to begin, let alone finish, a long narrative. As she acknowledges, she desires ends in narrative and in life, and I quote, "I'm guessing that when it comes to my turn to shuffle off, I want everything tied up." But it is the desire for the end that stalls rather than drives her reading. She says, "I couldn't bear to die and not know what happened." Of course, her lockdown framing is doubly paradoxical. She will not know what happens if she begins and does not finish the novel, nor will she know what happens if she simply doesn't start. Moreover, in some sense, she does know what happens at the end, given the novel's historically and generically determined destination. Cromwell will die. Despite her anxiety, Alexandra is unable to find out by simply skipping ahead either. As she says, she's not one of those people that can read the last page first. Whilst we might then, as Kermode argues, have our vital interest in the structure of time, in the Concord's books arranged between beginning, middle, and end, Alexandra's early lockdown fears affect her ability to read and reach an end. She is unable to reach the Judgment Day of maximal retrospection in fiction. Correlatively, she does not want to reach that endpoint so as not to experience Cromwell's demise. The very real fear she has of dying from COVID-19 was then experienced as a barrier to reading itself, a fear of dying in the midst of life and in the midst of a narrative. Whilst then, some people may have had more time for long reads in lockdown. Ultimately, not even having more time necessarily equates to more reading. At odds with those enthusiastic calls heralding lockdown as the perfect time for long reads, lockdown has been much more complex, exposing as much as offering the conditions reading requires. As Alexandra, for one, shows, reading does not happen in a vacuum, and lockdown was not some sort of empty time space in which to read Tolstoy. Rather, the temporal conditions of reading under lockdown complicate and enrich such notions, as well as the theoretical ideas and models proposed by the likes of Nussbaum, Commode, and Brooks. Indeed, rather than thinking about written narrative simply as a model through which to explore time, our study enables us to see, under specific coordinates, how the felt, lived experience of life and time affect reading, underscoring the fact that the relationship between life and reading is not simply a matter for narratological models, but a complex entanglement of multiple actors in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lupton and Professor Davies. Muchas gracias a los profesores Lupton y Davies por esta exposición tan rica, tan retadora y tan acuciosa. Creo que hay un montón de temas que podemos discutir. I think we have a lot of subjects we can discuss from your exposition. I am really impressed by the interdisciplinary aspect of your work. Estoy muy impresionado por el aspecto interdisciplinario de su trabajo. You use the work of many authors coming from Bruno Latour, Michel Serres, and many others. And I think this is a real example of how the studies on the book are made, should be made in our days in order to know the public who uses and reads books. Creo que este es un muy buen ejemplo de cómo se deben llevar a cabo investigaciones sobre cómo se está leyendo en la actualidad y sobre cómo se usan y se acerca uno a la lectura. I think that probably you will agree with me, works by book historians are translated into the methodology that you give us, can be translated to our day. You are doing history of the book in the present, if you can allow me this comparison. Creo que se puede hacer una comparación con los historiadores del libro. Los trabajos de los historiadores del libro se pueden traducir a nuestro tiempo presente con una metodología como la de la profesora Tina Lupton y el profesor Ben Davies. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about another aspect of this situation we are facing, about authors. How do you know how authors adapted to this situation? ¿Nos podría decir cómo los autores se adaptaron a esta situación? I imagine some of the authors trying to publish their books when the pandemic struck. Estoy imaginando algún autor que intentaba publicar su libro cuando la pandemia llegó. How did they manage to adapt to this new situation? ¿Cómo se adaptaron para enfrentar esta situación? Nuestra estudiante Ana Garzón nos va a ayudar con la traducción de los profesores Tina Lupton y Ben Davies.
Okay, shall I start, Ben? Yeah. Okay, well, Pablo, thank you for those comments. I mean, just to respond firstly to something you said about the history of our time as something that we're thinking about, I can speak as someone who's always worked on book history in the 18th century. Ben is a contemporary person through and through, but I am a book historian who's always worked on 18th century material. And I think I've been very motivated in this project by my own experience of the difficulty of recovering that experience of readers, because I've known how difficult it is as someone working on a period 200 or 300 years ago to ever recover what readers were doing. And because of that, I've imagined what we've been doing for this project as a way of sort of creating an archive that historians, book historians, literary historians in the future will be able to draw on. So that's just by way of comment. Anya, I don't know, do you want to?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. Entonces la profesora agradece los comentarios del doctor Pablo Áviles y comenta en torno a lo que dijo el doctor sobre crear historia del libro en un presente, por así decirlo, que ella, al ser investigadora de la historia del libro en el siglo XVIII, que el doctor Ben Davies es un contemporáneo a todo lo que da, pero ella se dedica a estudiar el siglo XVIII y que estos estudios la motivan a recuperar lo que viven los lectores en la época actual, que como ella está acostumbrada a recuperar lo que vivieron los lectores durante el siglo XVIII, la época actual la ha motivado a recuperar lo que viven los lectores en estos momentos para, a partir de eso, crear un archivo para que los historiadores del futuro tengan cómo acceder a las vivencias de los lectores.
So I didn't get to the author part of Pablo's question, but maybe, I mean, what you're asking in a way is an easy question because the new conditions that authors are responding to in a way are simply the conditions of increased book consumption, which is always an easy situation for authors to respond to, in the sense that the demand for written narrative has increased. But I'll hand up, and Ben may have some more to say about that. We did do some interviews with authors, so yeah.
Okay, and did you want to translate or should I just carry on?
Sure, Professor, I will briefly translate. La profesora Lupton nos comenta en torno a lo que dijo el doctor sobre la pregunta sobre cómo han reaccionado los autores en torno a esta época de la pandemia, y la profesora nos comenta que se han adaptado a estas nuevas condiciones que presentan más consumo mayor demanda por la narrativa escrita, cosa que es fácil y es agradable para los autores, y que sí realizaron algunas entrevistas con los autores de las cuales nos hablará el profesor Davies.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pick up on Pablo's first question, like Tina did actually, about the sort of archive and history of the book, because coming from it from a contemporary perspective, it seems to me now that as someone working on contemporary literature, we have the gift that there are readers out there right now we can talk to and research, and that's something that doesn't happen that much, actually, surprisingly. So I think for me it's about, if we're going to study contemporary literature, contemporary reading is part of that, and this is something that should be sort of carried out sort of all the time, really. But then to come back to the question of authors, I think we saw two general trends, opposing trends in terms of publishing. One was an initial delay. Books were delayed, and in the UK, there was sort of a mass publication day in September 2020, when the backlog that had occurred because of the initial pandemic came about. But on the other hand, you also saw a lot of works being rushed out, particularly online, and writers responding to the crisis particularly with diaries and sort of short form fiction. And then I guess one of the case studies we've looked at is Ali Smith's Summer, which is interesting because it was always scheduled to be published in the summer of 2020, which it was. And then it claims to be the first book to be wholly produced under lockdown as well. So she managed to include that lockdown pandemic narrative even within those sort of tight time constraints. So I think there are those two sort of opposing forces, at least initially, the delay, but also the rush to respond. And a lot of writers talking about the conditions under which they're writing. Zadie Smith, for example, talking about having too much unstructured time and then producing a book whilst talking about the problems of time.
Ania.
Thank you, Professor Davies. Entonces, el profesor primero nos habla sobre, retoma la primera pregunta del doctor Áviles en torno a la creación de un archivo, lo que comentó la profesora Lupton sobre la creación de un archivo sobre el comportamiento de los lectores y la realización de la actividad lectora en la actualidad, pero con un enfoque contemporáneo, que es a lo que él se dedica. Y dice que para esto tenemos que estudiar también no solo la actividad lectora contemporánea, sino también las lecturas, el material de lectura que se elige de manera contemporánea. Y luego nos explica los procesos que ocurrieron en la industria editorial en el Reino Unido durante esta época de pandemia, y comenta que hubo dos fenómenos. Por un lado, un fenómeno de retraso en las fechas de publicación de las obras, y esto culminó en un gran día de publicaciones masivas que sucedió en septiembre. Y por otro lado, la contraparte, una aceleración en las publicaciones, que los autores buscaban publicar de manera acelerada, muchos recurrían a publicar diarios, estudios, y que un caso muy sonado fue el caso de El verano de Alice Smith, un libro muy esperado, muy sonado, porque era el último de una serie de 4 libros que se publicó durante el verano del 2020, y también fue el primero de estos libros tan famosos que se escribió durante el confinamiento. Entonces, muchos de los autores también hablaron sobre las nuevas condiciones bajo las que estaban escribiendo, las condiciones de confinamiento y encierro.
Thank you very much for your answers, Professor Lupton and Davies. While I was listening to you, I couldn't help but remember this note from the New York Times about just one of these phenomena, the delay in order to actualize, how do you say that? In order to change some of the fiction stories. And also last year, we already talked about this when we met. Professor Francois Artaud told us about his experience on publishing his last book on crisis. Cuando estaba escuchando a los profesores Lupton y Davies, no pude evitar acordarme de una nota en el New York Times sobre algunos autores que tuvieron que justamente retrasar sus libros para actualizarlos a la nueva situación. Y el año pasado el profesor François Artaud nos contaba su experiencia sobre uno de sus libros que tuvo que actualizar en orden para poder publicarlo durante la pandemia. Thank you very much. We have some other questions, if you don't mind. Manuel?
Yes, we have 3 questions. I just translated, so I will read it and you can tell me what you think. First, Diana Saavedra, many congratulations for the work. Did the results you obtained hold up in 2021? Do you think that the perspective on our urgent return to activities affects the reading that you have seen in these results? Laura Martinez, good afternoon. A question: is it possible to say that most of the readers turned to their own libraries rather than buying new books? Ruben Castor, how did independent publishers survive this pandemic? In other words, was the publishing world somehow democratized by the new pandemic dynamics? That will be the 3 questions.
Okay. Good questions. Yeah, the shift to 21, 22, Ben, do you want to answer that? I think we've talked a lot about this. We recently submitted a book that we wrote on the basis of this study, and we had to decide when to cut that book, like where that book finished. And I think for us, it was important that there was that we were speaking to readers during a time where in Denmark and the UK, And I think this is different, quite different in many other places, including, of course, across the whole of North America. But I think it was a time when people really had felt that they were commanded by government rules to spend a lot more time than they normally would at home. And that applied to people across the board. And that condition, those conditions of government imposed lockdown were important for the readers that we spoke to. So it wasn't just about fear of going outside or a sort of changing sense of social norms. It was really about being told to stay inside for many months at a time. But of course that did change and has changed in the places that we began this study in. So I don't know.
Yeah, just to add, so in the UK, there were points where you were only allowed out once a day for permitted exercise and essential shopping. So, you know, pretty much 23 hours every day, you're indoors. And the other thing to say is the book in the UK and in Denmark, actually, we sort of went in and out of lockdowns. There have been sort of you know, it wasn't just one lockdown. We had an initial lockdown, then during the summer of 2020, we were sort of freed up to go out again. Then winter came and there was another lockdown. So one thing we do in the book is trace the way that these reading trends changed even during the pandemic, because the pandemic isn't just sort of one homogenous thing, if you like. So we do have some insights onto that, particularly around, not that we're predicting, but we do see that when people are allowed outside again, the reading sort of goes down. And so if we're thinking about what's going to happen next, it might be that when people are allowed to socialize more and get back out, you know, the boon in reading may dissipate a little bit. There's probably quite a lot to translate there, so I'll stop.
Procedo a interpretar lo que dijeron los profesores. Entonces, la primera pregunta sobre cómo se adaptaron sobre si estos resultados, esta investigación se adapta a los cambios en las regulaciones del 2020. La profesora Lupton nos comenta que este estudio los llevó a la creación y eventual de un libro. Y algo que debatían ellos era en qué momento ponemos fin a este libro, dónde cortamos lo que estamos investigando. Entonces, algo que fue muy importante para ellos durante la investigación y que consideran que fue diferente su enfoque, dado que algo que fue muy importante para ellos durante la investigación fue dirigirse a lectores en una época en la cual en Dinamarca y el Reino Unido las personas sentían y eran recibían órdenes de los gobiernos para quedarse en casa, sentían esta imposición gubernamental de quedarse en casa. No era como en otras áreas en el mundo, sino que ahí realmente la presión del gobierno se sentía mucho, que ellos saben que era diferente, por ejemplo, en Norteamérica, y que estas condiciones, claro, han cambiado. Que el profesor Davies nos comenta que en el Reino Unido, por ejemplo, solo podían salir había momentos durante la pandemia que solo podían salir una vez al día para hacer ejercicio y las compras esenciales. Y que en el libro, por supuesto, estas cosas han fluctuado, han cambiado, y el libro hace un seguimiento de esto, de la manera en la que entraban y salían del confinamiento, y que ellos, por supuesto, saben que las condiciones de lectura van a cambiar y han cambiado en los momentos en los que se permite salir y se permite más tiempo afuera.
Okay, I think the second question was about were people reading more from their own bookshelves, libraries, than buying. Certainly in the UK and Denmark, that was the case at the beginning of the very beginning of the pandemic, because a lot of services, bookshops shut, libraries shut. So people, and we have a chapter on this in the book, that people often turn to either favorite books, particularly classics that they'd read as teenagers and were rereading, or picking up books that they'd long ago bought but not read. So a lot of people refer to their to-be-read piles as being sort of incredibly sort of nourishing and important at this point. And what we also see is that sort of people being much more assertive about what they wanted to read. So a lot of our respondents talked about reading, forgetting about what they'd been taught they should read, say at school and university, and actually doing the reading that they wanted to do regardless of what that was. And often that came about through the books they had to hand at the beginning because they couldn't access books in other ways. Eventually, there were sort of library ordering services where you could sort of order online and then drive up to the library and do curbside pickup. And then obviously people started to purchase books online. But even that, initially people were hesitant to open the books they'd purchased online because people were worried about the virus. So you were advised to leave parcels for 48 hours before buying. So there was this delay actually, and even if you had purchased either from Amazon or independent publishers.
En tanto a la segunda pregunta sobre si la gente se dirigía más a sus bibliotecas personales para elegir las lecturas, sí, al inicio de la pandemia, sobre todo al inicio del confinamiento, por lo menos en Reino Unido y en Dinamarca, donde realizaron las entrevistas, cerraron las librerías. Entonces las personas frecuentemente se dirigían, decidían elegir sus libros favoritos o los clásicos y buscaban mucho en lo que llaman su to be read pile o la lista de libros que compraron hace mucho y que tienen ahí apilados y a los que nunca se habían abocado. Y por otro lado, encontraron que también había personas que eran mucho más asertivas en tanto a lo que iban a leer, que ignoraban lo que se les había dicho en la escuela, en la universidad, que tenían que leer y más bien leían lo que querían. En muchos casos esto era lo que tenían a la mano, lo que tenían en casa, pero poco a poco después iniciaron servicios de bibliotecas en los que podían ordenar los libros en línea y después pasar por ellos. Después comenzaron las compras en línea, pero la gente titubeaba mucho en tanto y tenía miedo, estaban asustados por el virus, se les recomendaba que dejaran los paquetes de libros o de lo que ordenaran en línea hasta 48 horas sin tocarlos por si podían venir infectados, entonces la gente titubeaba un poco al momento de comprarlos en línea.
Thank you very much. I think those were all the questions from this set. Yeah, and there is another question. I want to translate it. Professor Lupton already replied to that in the chat. Quisiera traducir una pregunta y una respuesta que dio la profesora Tina Lupton en el chat. Adriana Carreón preguntó, ¿podemos decir que el impulso inicial para leer durante el confinamiento vino de los lectores? Si es así, podemos decir que habrá un cambio permanente en los hábitos de lectura de la gente y que no sería el mismo durante la pandemia o que sería lo suficientemente cercano. Y la profesora Tina Lupton respondió en el chat, sí, creo que el primer impulso fue de manera orgánica y vino de los lectores, aunque también hubo algunas iniciativas para alimentar esta tendencia. El cambio quizás no sea permanente, absolutamente permanente, pero estamos hablando de muchísimos lectores que dijeron que querían continuar leyendo incluso cuando la normalidad regresara. And then we have two other questions. Well, there are many other questions, but I already translated two for you. Arnulfo de Santiago, he wants to know about your own experience as readers. What about your own experience as readers? That's another interesting experience for research, says Arnulfo de Santiago. ¿Cuál fue su propia experiencia personal como lectores? Esta experiencia también es de interés para investigar. And Mauricio Barreiro, he makes a comment. I will try to put it in short. pandemic intensified incertitude both among fiction readers and academic readers because of the libraries and bookstores being closed, and not knowing about how many time we had left if we got sick, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. The difference today is technology, which in a certain way let readers get through the lockdown. My question is, how did libraries and editorial houses in the UK and Denmark adapted their selling strategies, both digital and physical? Creo que no la traduje al español. La pandemia, Mauricio Barreiro hace un comentario sobre la pandemia intensificando la incertidumbre, y al final pregunta cómo se adaptaron las librerías y las editoriales en el Reino Unido y en Dinamarca, sus estrategias de venta, tanto digitales como físicas.
Okay, should I take the first question first? So in terms of own reading experiences, I guess, like some of our readers, I began thinking that I would read or reread or, you know, all of Proust and that sort of thing. And that didn't happen. I think for academics, work became sort of 24/7, at least in the UK. We were all on Zoom all the time. There wasn't much free time. But doing the project meant that we were also reading what our readers told us they were reading. So in a way, a lot of my reading was sort of taken up by doing the research. And that's one thing I think we agree on, that actually doing the project, although it was difficult because we couldn't travel and meet up as much as we wanted, the book is a product of writing during lockdown itself, the book we've written. And actually doing the project was a sort of saving grace. I think in some ways it got us through lockdown in ways that were more pleasurable than if we weren't doing the project. So I think it had that sort of dual aspect to it, and the sort of tension and the frustration on the one hand, but also the positive aspects of being able to read, do research and write, and not doing it completely alone when we're often living completely alone.
En tanto a su experiencia propia de lectura, el profesor Davies comenta que al principio del confinamiento, él pensó, como los lectores de su estudio, que también iba a leer o releer toda la obra de Proust, pero que pronto se dio cuenta de que los académicos no tenían casi tiempo libre, que estaban en Zoom 24/7. Entonces, que poco a poco, conforme avanzó el proyecto, su lectura se volcó a leer lo que leían los lectores de su mismo estudio y también a leer para la misma investigación. Comenta que su proyecto y este libro que han escrito, en el cual culminó el proyecto, ha sido también un producto de escribir durante el confinamiento y que ha sido una especie de salvación, que tiene un aspecto dual. Por un lado está la frustración que viene con todo lo que están estudiando, de no poder salir, de todo lo que se explicó en el estudio, de no saber si se podrán acabar todas estas obras. Y por otro lado está la sensación de saber que se está leyendo en compañía de otras personas, que se está escribiendo en compañía de otras personas.
Thank you very much. Manuel?
Sí, tenemos algunas preguntas más en el chat. Bueno, agradezco, I thank you, Tina, because she's answering questions on the chat. Eso nos ha ayudado mucho a dinamizar un poco las inquietudes de la gente. Thank you, Tina, for your answers on the chat. And we have this time from José Carlos Irastorza. How to elude a balance between the reality imposed by the pandemic and the fiction that our reader seeks to live and experience in readings. How to balance these two great forces that we are struggling with today. Tina, you're mute. Sorry.
Okay, I will try that very big question. I mean, I don't think that all reading is not all fiction reading involves people wanting to escape. I think in many cases, it can involve wanting to make sense of the world, perhaps in a different way, from a different angle, but still being very much in touch with reality. I mean, we certainly spoke to readers who wanted to read anything but pandemic fiction, but we spoke to many readers who wanted to read things that would bring them closer to reality. But I should probably also, just to be honest, add that I am a literary critic, and a literary critic trained in to believe that language contributes also to reality. So the way that we understand this pandemic and its reality is, I think, indebted to many literary representations of what it means to experience mass sickness and contagion, and to feel ourselves in jeopardy as a species. And all of these feelings that we have, I don't think we would be half so intelligent about those feelings if we didn't have such a wealth of literary examples of thinking about them. So I guess I'm refusing the binary of fiction and reality. I guess that is my response, that I think we are living through very hard times, but I don't think that there is I don't think the hardship is that fiction and reality are heading in different directions. I think, as ever, maybe they are mutually defining and also of mutual sort of help in making sense of each other. Sorry, Anya.
Oh, no problem at all, Professor. It's perfectly fine. Yeah, no, it was harder for you because you had to answer. La profesora nos comenta que tratará de responder esta enorme y difícil pregunta sobre cómo hallar un balance entre la realidad y la ficción. ¿Cómo podemos encontrar un balance entre este deseo de ir al mundo de la ficción para escapar la difícil realidad que se está viviendo con la pandemia? Entonces, la doctora Lupton nos dice que ella no cree que toda ficción implica un escape, que a veces la ficción implica darle sentido al mundo desde un ángulo diferente, pero siempre estando en contacto con la realidad. Nos dice que también los lectores de su estudio no siempre buscaban, que entrevistaron a gente que no siempre quería leer temas de pandemia o de pestes, sino que a veces querían leer todo lo contrario. Ella es una crítica literaria y su formación la hace entender el lenguaje como un mecanismo para entender la realidad. Y con esta premisa, ella piensa que el lenguaje es un acercamiento, el lenguaje y la literatura son un acercamiento para entender la pandemia y la realidad de la pandemia. Y comenta que es a través de la literatura y de los referentes de la literatura que podemos darle sentido a la pandemia y a la realidad pandémica, y que podemos entender y experimentar todas estas sensaciones y estos sentimientos en torno al encierro, a los contagios, al esparcimiento de un virus, y que podemos tener a través de estos referentes literarios la inteligencia emocional para comprender lo que estamos viviendo. Entonces, dependemos de los ejemplos literarios que ya tenemos. Ella dice que niega que exista un espectro, que niega que sea una situación binaria entre lo ficticio y real, sino que más bien es un espectro, que por supuesto estamos viviendo tiempos difíciles, pero no es que por un lado vaya la ficción y por el otro lado vaya la realidad, sino que van caminando de manera conjunta para darle sentido a lo que estamos viviendo.
Thank you again. I want to translate another question you already answered, Professor Lupton, in the chat. Voy a traducir otra respuesta que dio la profesora Lupton en el chat sobre los vendedores, sobre los libreros independientes, las librerías independientes. La profesora Lupton dice, están bajo una enorme presión y es muy difícil ser optimistas, pero tenemos algunos buenos ejemplos de lectores diciendo que voluntariamente compraban sus libros con libreros pequeños, con libreros independientes. Y luego otra pregunta de Julia de la Fuente, si sobre su estudio también cubrió los libros electrónicos y los audiolibros. Tina Lupton responde que no planearon estudiar los audiolibros, pero que sí muchos de sus entrevistados, de los lectores que entrevistaron, describieron el uso de audiolibros y también lo consideran como un factor muy importante. Finalmente, Seferino Mendoza manda un comentario. Excellent experience from our host, Mr. Ben Davies and Cristina Lupton. Thank you for sharing your research and point of view. It's great to hear from you as readers and writers. Muchísimas gracias al doctor Davies y a la doctora Lupton por compartir su punto de vista y su trabajo. I think we can ask one or two more questions if you are okay with that, and probably coming back to this point of fiction and reality, I think this is a very very important point of view, and it has a very deep meaning, because as you said, we came back to these books in order to make sense of this time. Creo que esto es un punto muy importante, la diferencia entre ficción y realidad, porque la mayoría de los lectores nos dirigimos hacia estos libros para tratar de darle un sentido a la ficción y a la realidad. Y sobre todo, como uno de los comentarios que daba uno de los lectores sobre cómo atravesar la cuarentena. And taking back one of the comments from the public, how to get through this lockdown, and evidently reading was one way to get through. Do you have, Manuel, another question from there?
Yes, I have a question. It's about something you said on your lecture. What could you tell us about the gender bias and skin color on readers in the pandemic that you mentioned in your conference? You said that most of the readers are women, white women, and what do you think about this in Mexico, in countries in Latin America? You think a priori it would be the same, or I think it will change? Or what do you think about this thing you said on your lecture?
Well, I mean, the thing that we said in our lecture about most of the readers that we spoke to being women was something that we encountered when we started doing surveys and asking for interviews. I think most people in the publishing industry and the book selling industry know that this is the case in terms of the consumption of novels is predominantly by women. I don't know if it's true in Mexico, but I would imagine that it probably tilts in that direction too. I don't know it's hard. Do you want me to try and say more about what we think about that, Manuel, or is it just I think it's something that's been true for at least most of the 20th century, but I'm not.
I would like to say something about your reality in Denmark, in UK. Why is this situation like that? I mean, which would you think is the reason?
Why? Yeah. I think this is a very big topic that it's very interesting to us that we're quite late in our careers as literary critics, and we're having to deal with this question, which if you just write about books, of course, you can avoid that, thinking about that, because you're writing about books that don't seem particularly to be for women or for white women or for, but I don't know. Ben, do you want to have a go at explaining it?
Well, I think that, well, the novel has had a long history of being seen as something, you know, women do as opposed to men. And I think at the current stage in the UK, there is still, there is even more perhaps that the idea that reading generally and reading novels or literature is still seen as something sort of girls do or women do. And for instance, in the UK, in the last few years, the statistics of undergraduates studying English literature tilts about, I think it's 78% female. So, you know, that's the data. Why that is, I do think at the moment, and, you know, there has been this sort of emphasis on that reading isn't something seen as masculine for, you know, or the, you know, things that boys should do. And there are lots of initiatives, you know, and there have been lots of initiatives to try and rectify that, but the trends seem to support, you know, I mean, the data seems to show that that hasn't done anything. So I think there is this sort of, I think there's to do with gender, I think there's to do with stereotypes, and there's also this question of utility or use that's prevalent in the UK. And you see this in higher education, what use are the humanities? And there's a strong drive to get people into engineering and, you know, and all these things. I think that's a long-winded way of saying I don't really know why, but those are the sort of factors involved here, I think. And it'd be interesting to hear if that is the same in Mexico, actually. Are women the predominant novel readers? I don't know.
Bueno, Ravis, les pregunté...
Perdón, ¿puedo hacer la interpretación de lo que dijeron durante?
Adelante, Annie.
Gracias. Entonces, la pregunta que lanza el doctor Manuel Suárez es si pueden comentar algo sobre lo que mencionaron en su estudio y en la conferencia sobre el perfil sociológico y los aspectos raciales o de género de la gente a la que entrevistaron y cómo cambiaría este aspecto si este estudio se hiciera en Latinoamérica. Entonces, nos comenta la profesora que esto, que como mencionaron en el estudio, es cierto que la mayoría de las lectoras, la gente que lee, que consume la novela, son mujeres, y esto es algo que la industria de los libros, que la industria editorial sabe, y que probablemente es algo que también sería cierto en México, porque es algo que ha sido cierto a lo largo de la mayoría del siglo XX, pero que no, es una pregunta muy grande, entonces da para toda una investigación. El doctor Suárez pregunta que si nos pueden dar información de por qué es así en Reino Unido y Dinamarca, como muestra su estudio, por qué es que se encuentra este perfil sociológico en los lectores, a lo cual la doctora Lupton nos responde que es una pregunta muy grande, que al estar ya en un punto avanzado de su carrera como investigadores, se puede evitar entrar en este debate cuando escribes sobre libros y no sobre el perfil de las personas, cuando se escribe literatura sobre los libros, pero que es una pregunta muy grande que da para toda otra investigación también. Y dije la palabra al profesor Davies, que nos explica que la novela históricamente siempre ha sido algo que se le atribuye, la lectura de la novela siempre ha sido algo que se le atribuye a las mujeres. Sobre todo es algo que es cierto en la historia moderna y en el Reino Unido, que es algo que se atribuye a las niñas, es algo que se atribuye a las mujeres y que las estadísticas respaldan estas atribuciones. Las estadísticas, por ejemplo, para los estudiantes de licenciatura en la carrera de letras inglesas, son 78% estudiantes, 78% de los estudiantes son mujeres. Entonces, lo que se necesita saber es por qué. El profesor nos explica que en este momento de la historia hay un énfasis en cuestionar el por qué. Hay un énfasis en cuestionar el por qué la lectura se atribuye tanto a las mujeres y por qué no se le atribuyen cualidades de masculinidad a la lectura, por ejemplo. Pero que a la par que hay este cuestionamiento, los datos y la información que se obtiene respalda lo que se ha visto comprobado a lo largo de la historia, de que es algo que, por un lado, tiene que ver con estereotipos de género, y por otro lado, tiene que ver, el doctor Davies opina, con quizá la manera en la que se critica a las humanidades y se cuestiona que quizá, o se dice que cuál es el uso, cuál puede ser la utilidad del uso de las humanidades y cómo se impulsa, por lo menos en Reino Unido, a la gente a estudiar ingenierías más que estudiar humanidades, porque se cuestiona la utilidad de las mismas. No lo sabe, estos solo son factores, no se sabe la razón, pero estos son factores que definitivamente influyen.
Muchísimas gracias. Nos gustaría agradecer, si quieres, Ania, hazlo al revés, lo digo en español y se los dices a ellos en inglés. Nos gustaría mucho agradecer su presencia, su estudio me parece que arroja mucha información sobre un fenómeno histórico actual presente de historia de la lectura y que seguramente será muy bien recibido en México, en Latinoamérica, invitando a que se haga algún estudio similar en esta zona geográfica.
Dr. Manuel Suárez would like to, Professor Lupton and Professor Davies, Dr. Manuel Suárez would like to thank you for being here and for your presentation and for your study. And he says that it includes lots of information on the present phenomena that the history of reading, that reading itself is going through, and that he believes that it will be very warmly welcomed here in Latin America, and that he believes that it could very well impulse studies of the same kind to be held in Latin America in order to see what's going on here with the phenomenon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lupton. And Davis, would you like to say some last comments on this conference and this experience of sharing your survey in Mexico?
Well, just thank you for your colleagueship and your translation, Anya, and the rest of you, everyone who worked on doing the subtitles too. That was very impressive. Yeah, I hope we get to keep working together in some way in the future. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. It'll be interesting to see if studies do come out about Latin America and Mexico. We'd be interested.
Yeah,
really. In the future, yeah, and yeah, the Anya, the translation is very impressive. Actually, the live translation is an impressive skill. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, so, bueno, ¿quieres traducir lo que dijeron, Ania, ya para cerrar? Perdón.
Agradecen la profesora Lupton y el profesor Davies, agradecen la colaboración con el Instituto de Bibliográficas a través del doctor Áviles, del doctor Suárez, y agradecen la traducción y el servicio de subtitulado que hubo para su presentación, y realmente están emocionados de que exista la posibilidad de colaborar en un futuro, y mencionan que sería muy interesante ver si sale algún estudio en el futuro en Latinoamérica, en México, y ver de qué manera se desarrolla eso.
Muchísimas gracias, Ania. Agradecemos la generosidad de los profesores en su participación en esta ilustrativa charla y al público que nos acompañó en la transmisión y que nutrió el diálogo con sus preguntas. Aprovecho para agradecer el trabajo del equipo del Instituto de Investigaciones Bibliográficas que hacen posible que esta emisión tenga lugar: a Ana María Romero, a Guillermo Gómez Aleta, Giselle Cosillo, a Ania Garzón en la traducción, el doctor Pablo Avilés. Antes de despedirnos, los invitamos a la siguiente charla de este ciclo, que tendrá lugar el próximo martes 1 de febrero del 2022 a la 1 de la tarde por este mismo medio. Los invitamos a registrarse al evento para que reciban la liga del chat y exista algún tipo de interacción con los profesores, como en este caso se dio con la profesora Cristina Lupton y algunos asistentes en Zoom. El especialista invitado en la próxima sesión será el profesor Andrew Pittsgree de la Universidad de St. Andrews, y esta tendrá un formato más de charla, más de entrevista. Les agradecemos mucho su presencia y hasta luego. Recuerden que el próximo martes tienen una cita con la Biblioteca Nacional de México. Gracias.